The Callisto Protocol released a couple weeks ago, and I finally got a chance to play it over the weekend. As a hardcore fan of Dead Space, I've been looking forward to this game since its announcement back in 2020 at the Game Awards. After watching a few trailers for this game and hearing Glenn Schofield, the CEO of Striking Distance and the executive producer of the Dead Space series, speak about this project at multiple events, I was confident that he and his team were going to make a worthy spiritual successor to that franchise. I had so much faith that Striking Distance could create something special, given that the team includes some former Dead Space developers. As we got closer to the release of this title, I decided not to watch any more trailers or industry previews because I was already sold on the game and felt like I didn't need to see any more. Turns out that might have been a mistake. The first sign that things didn't turn out well is the fact that reviews didn't drop until the day the game came out. I haven't watched any of them yet, but I've heard that the Metacritic score is sitting at a 72. It pains me to say this, but after playing for over 16 hours, I think that rating is a tad bit too generous. The Callisto Protocol is the worst game I played this year and is another disappointment that I strongly suggest not wasting your money on. Before I elaborate on why this game is bad, I want to make sure to highlight some good aspects about this title. Visually speaking, the Callisto Protocol looks pretty good for a cross-gen game. The character models for the main cast like Jacob, Elias, and Danny are all very detailed. Their designs might be forgettable and a little generic, but at least the voice acting for each of them is solid. In regards to the story, from what I experienced, it wasn't nearly as interesting as the narrative from the original Dead Space. However, I was surprised by how Striking Distance chose to handle a certain character later on in the story, given some dialogue earlier from Danny. This game has a lot of flaws, but one thing that Schofield and his team managed to get right is the horror element. While not quite on the level of Dead Space, there are some effective jump scares, and they managed to create an unsettling atmosphere through the lighting, music, and audio design. The Callisto Protocol's problems mostly stem from its poor pacing and lackluster design in several areas. Some of the design decisions the developers made are absolutely baffling, such as the omission of a map which would have been useful so that players don't get lost. There were plenty of moments where I didn't know where to go and wasted a lot of time backtracking. One way they could have alleviated this issue is to add a locator feature similar to Dead Space, in which you press down the right stick and then the game shows you where to go. The lack of these features seems like a major oversight considering it existed in a game made in 2008. The same game that some of these people had a hand in creating. This game's biggest design flaw lies in its melee-focused combat, which totally caught me off guard during the first hour. The Callisto Protocol might look similar to Dead Space, but its gameplay is totally different. Don't go in expecting this to play like Dead Space, or you'll be very disappointed like I was. Although you'll eventually get access to weapons like a hand cannon or a shotgun, you'll mostly be evading enemy attacks and striking them with a shock baton. Dodging works by holding the left stick in one direction when an enemy attacks. This works fine during one-on-one encounters, and initially bobbing and weaving the biophage's strikes feels great. However, this feeling fades very quickly and is replaced with frustration and tediousness as the game repeatedly throws multiple enemies at you at once during its mini gauntlets. Dodging becomes a major issue when you're surrounded by multiple enemies due to how it's implemented. Furthermore, this game lacks any effective crowd control options. There is a heavy attack upgrade that's supposed to assist with dealing with multiple targets, but it never seemed to help. The shotgun isn't very effective either. This problem is exacerbated whenever you get too far away from certain enemies that will start spitting stuff at you. I absolutely hate the combat in this game and the emphasis put on evasion. The Callisto Protocol is a glorified juking simulator. This is such a strange mechanic to put in a survival horror game. It feels so out of place and it's kinda silly. There are times when this mechanic really goes against the level design, such as moments where there is low visibility. At that point, evading becomes a guessing game. Beyond that, the weapons the player is given to deal with the biophages are inadequate and aren't satisfying to use. I didn't get a chance to play with each one fully upgraded, but from my experience, they're very ineffective. I maxed out the damage on the shock baton, but I might as well have been hitting the enemies with a wooden stick. Most of the enemies seem like hell sponges on the normal difficulty. There's a noticeable lack of creativity not only in regards to the weapons, but also the enemy design as well. Unlike Dead Space, you're stuck using regular weapons that don't keep the gameplay engaging instead of something unique that could spice things up. The whole time I was playing the game, I kept wishing I could get something like the plasma cutter to start shooting limbs off of the biophages. The GRP or grip is the only unique piece of gear Jacob has, which allows him to pull objects toward him as well as throw it with tremendous force. Unfortunately, it's very limited in its range and it can't be used to immobilize multiple targets like you could using stasis in Dead Space. The grip could have been a great crowd control tool had the developers added more functionality to it through upgrades. This game is very stingy when it comes to money, so I imagine fully upgrading your weapons is a hassle. As I stated earlier, the Callisto Protocol has a big pacing issue. You receive new equipment at a very slow rate and none of the weapons or upgrades ever made me feel empowered. I never felt like I was more capable of surviving longer against the threats that came my way. It takes a while to get the suit that's apparently in some of the more recent trailers, which increases your health and storage capacity, but it didn't seem like a very significant upgrade as I progressed through the game. Aside from that, the developers do a poor job at presenting some variety to the player in regards to the challenge they have to overcome. Striking Distance relies too heavily on the same uninspired gauntlet setup in which the player must defeat waves of enemies until something is complete. It's lazy, and as a result, combat becomes repetitive very quickly. Later on in the game, there's a section that encourages a slower and stealthier approach as a new enemy is introduced that is a much needed change of pace. I wasn't a fan of one of the earlier sections where you had to sneak past the security robot, but that other part featuring the new biophage was so much better. This game needed more unique sections in addition to these stealthy parts to break up the monotony of fighting a bunch of enemies one after another. Something else that could also contribute to the pacing problem is how the saving feature works. Depending on your skill level and resource management, you might be stuck a while on some of the gauntlet sections. It's rare that the game autosaves when you're at the last part of one of these tiresome affairs, so when you die, you'll have to start over from the beginning. Manually saving is utterly useless as the game always sends you back to the latest checkpoint, so as a result, you're forced to endure the same encounters over and over again if you die. I've spent over an hour retrying the same sections, and most of the time I wasted could have been cut significantly if the checkpointing and saving was better implemented. Ultimately, I couldn't force myself to finish this game due to the issues I just spoke of, in addition to the horrible design of one of its boss encounters. I only had a couple chapters left and we're almost finished with chapter 6 until I reached a point where completing the game was going to be impossible unless I restarted using a much earlier save. If I did that, I probably would have had to go through the same section again, in addition to fighting a wave of biophages before finally reaching the boss, which takes a minute to kill and one-shots you on the normal difficulty. In my predicament, I only had 12 bullets left in my hand cannon, and that wasn't enough to fully take down this boss. It baffles me that the developers didn't account for players running out of ammo during this scenario, given that this boss pops up right after you finish clearing out waves of enemies. They could have had items littered around the environment that you could throw at the enemy using the grip. For example, there was a saw blade lying around during an earlier section of the game that you could pick up using the grip. Something like that could have been useful if the player ran out of ammo, because if you do, there's no other way to damage this boss. By the way, the attention to detail kinda sucks in this game, as many things in the environment can't be picked up using the grip, and the destructibility is very limited as well. On a technical level, the Callisto Protocol isn't very impressive. From what I've heard, the game launched with performance issues on PC, although a patch has fixed some of it. You can definitely tell this is a cross-gen game by the level design. There are numerous moments where you'll be squeezing through tight spaces, which is just a way for developers to mask the loading that's occurring in the background. Expect to crawl through a lot of vents in this game as well. There aren't any environmental puzzles that take advantage of the grip, which seems like a missed opportunity, and Blackgate Prison isn't nearly as aesthetically captivating as the Ishimura was in Dead Space. Overall, the Callisto Protocol is a game that failed to live up to its potential as a successor to the greatest survival horror franchise ever made. It's clear that Schofield and his team love the genre and are capable of capturing the right vibes for this kind of game. It really sucks that this game turned out this way, but hopefully they can learn from their mistakes with this one. After playing this though, I will be very cautious of whatever they choose to do next. If you played the Callisto Protocol, let me know what you guys thought about it in the comment section below, and as always, thank you guys for watching. I'm out of here. Peace.